I hid my face, so strangers wouldn't see me cry, but when the man beside me whispered, "Why are you crying?" I looked up and my whole life shattered. His eyes, they were the same ones in the photograph my mother burned. I was sitting on that cold park bench, alone, pretending to fix my shoelace while tears blurred everything around me. My fingers fumbled with the laces I didn't need to tie, but I needed something, anything, to look like I had a purpose, like I wasn't just another broken person falling apart in public. This wasn't some dramatic breakdown. This wasn't me being weak. This was years of abandonment finally demanding space, clawing its way out of my chest where I'd locked it away like some shameful secret nobody was supposed to see. I wasn't expecting comfort. Why would I? Nobody had ever paused long enough to notice my pain before. People walk past suffering every single day. They see it, they register it somewhere in the back of their minds, and then they keep moving because caring is inconvenient, because other people's wounds are too heavy to carry when they're already drowning in their own. I learned that lesson early. I learned that crying gets you nowhere except more alone. Then he sat down, quietly, beside me. Not intruding, not staring with that uncomfortable pity that makes you feel like a zoo animal, just existing with this unsettling gentleness that I didn't know how to process. I could feel him there, this stranger who had no reason to care, no obligation to stay, and yet he didn't leave. He just sat there while I pretended my shoelace was the most important thing in the world. When he finally asked why I was crying, his voice was so soft it almost broke me all over again. That question, those simple words, felt like a hand reaching into a wound I'd spent years hiding, years covering with smiles and "I'm fine," and whatever lies people wanted to hear, so they'd stop asking. Nobody asks why you're crying when they actually want to know. They ask because it's polite, because it's what you're supposed to say, and then they wait for you to lie so everyone can move on and pretend everything's okay. But he asked like he meant it, like my answer mattered. And that terrified me more than anything. Let me take you back. Let me show you why that moment on the bench shattered everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about the stories I'd been fed since I was old enough to understand words. My childhood was stitched together with emotional distance. That's the kindest way I can describe it. My mother rarely offered warmth, only warnings. Don't trust anyone. Don't expect anything. Don't be disappointed when people leave, because they always leave. Her bitterness seeped into everything, poisoning the air I breathed until I started to believe that love was something that happened to other people, in other families, but never to me. My father believed silence fixed everything. A problem ignored is a problem solved, right?
Wrong.
So wrong. But that's what I grew up with. Two parents who taught me that staying small, staying quiet, staying out of the way was the safest way to survive. Don't ask questions. Don't make waves. Don't need too much because needing makes you vulnerable and vulnerability gets you hurt. I learned those lessons well.
Too well.
I became a ghost in my own home, drifting through rooms like I didn't quite belong there, like I was some temporary guest who'd overstayed her welcome but had nowhere else to go. And maybe that's exactly what I was. I was 10 years old when I found the photograph. It was tucked away in the back of a drawer my mother thought I'd never open, hidden beneath old bills and expired coupons and all the clutter of a life barely held together. The photograph was faded, the edges worn soft from being held too many times by hands that weren't mine. In it, I saw a little girl I recognized as my mother, younger, softer, before the bitterness carved lines into her face. She was standing beside a tall man with warm, intelligent eyes. Those eyes, God, those eyes haunted me in the strangest, most comforting way. They didn't match the bitterness in my mother's stories. They didn't match the monster she described in those rare moments when she bothered to mention him at all. In the photograph, those eyes looked kind. They looked like they belonged to someone who knew how to love without conditions, without anger, without making you feel like you owed them something for every scrap of affection they threw your way. I only asked about him once. Just once. I held the photograph carefully, like it might disintegrate in my hands, and I walked into the kitchen where my mother was washing dishes with that aggressive efficiency she had, like she was angry at the plates for existing. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice small because I already knew I was crossing some invisible line. She turned, saw what I was holding, and her face went white, then red, then something worse, something cold and empty. She snatched the photograph from my hands so violently, I thought she might strike me. "He abandoned us," she said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. End of discussion. She burned it that night. I watched through the crack in my bedroom door as she held it over the kitchen sink, as the flame consumed those warm eyes, as my one connection to something that might have been love turned to ash and disappeared down the drain. But she couldn't burn my memory. That picture stayed locked inside my head, the only image of family that didn't sting, the only face that looked like it might have chosen me if given the chance. I never asked about him again. But I thought about him constantly. This phantom father who abandoned us, this villain in my mother's story, this man with kind eyes who apparently didn't care enough to stay. Back on the park bench, I finally lifted my head to answer the stranger. To tell him I was fine, probably. To feed him whatever lie would make him comfortable and let him leave with his conscience clear. And I froze. His eyes. Oh God, his eyes. The same shape. The same gentle sadness. The exact eyes from that burned photograph. The ones I'd carried in my memory for over 2 decades. The ones I'd convinced myself I'd imagined or romanticized because nobody real could have eyes like that. Eyes that looked like home when you'd never had one. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat, stuck there, suffocating me. He was studying my face the same way I was studying his, like he was trying to read the years written across it, trying to find something familiar in the features of a stranger crying on a park bench. Then he spoke, and his voice was so soft, so careful, like he was afraid of breaking something already shattered. He said a name, a childhood nickname, one I'd almost forgotten because nobody had used it in years, decades maybe. A nickname my mother used to mention in those rare, unguarded moments before she caught herself being tender and snapped back into her armor of anger. A nickname she swore nobody else knew, that she'd made up just for me when I was too young to remember being loved. But he knew it. This stranger knew it. The world tilted. My pulse stumbled over itself, racing and stopping and racing again until I thought my heart might just give up entirely. My past rearranged itself in that moment, every memory shifting and reforming like puzzle pieces I'd been forcing into the wrong places my entire life. Everything I thought I knew, everything I'd been told, every story my mother had built to keep me away from the truth, it all crumbled. My voice cracked. I could barely get the words out. You can't be him. But I knew. Somewhere deep in my bones, in that place where truth lives before your brain catches up, I knew exactly who he was. And he knew I knew. I saw it in his eyes. Those same warm, intelligent eyes from the photograph. Recognition and grief, and a lifetime of missing someone mixed together into something so painful, I had to look away. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." And just like that, everything I thought was solid ground beneath my feet turned to water. He told me the truth. The real truth. The truth my mother had buried under years of rage and unresolved wounds and her own pain that she'd weaponized against everyone around her, especially him, especially me. He didn't abandon us. He didn't abandon anyone.
He was pushed out.
Erased.
Blocked.
Silenced. There was a divorce, a manipulative, vicious, soul-destroying divorce, where my mother used me as a weapon without caring that weapons get damaged in battle. There was a bitter ex-wife who convinced herself that if she couldn't have the marriage she wanted, she'd make damn sure he'd never have the daughter he loved. There were court rulings written by people who didn't care about truth, only about which lawyer shouted louder, which parent seemed more sympathetic, which story fit the narrative judges wanted to believe.
He searched for me.
He begged. He wrote letters that were never delivered because my mother threw them away before I could see his handwriting, before I could know someone out there was thinking about me, missing me, fighting for me. He visited my schools only to be escorted out by security guards who saw him as a threat instead of a father desperate to see his child's face. He hired lawyers who took his money and delivered nothing but broken promises. He did everything a person could do when the system is designed to keep you away, when your own child is taught to hate you before they're old enough to question why. My mother grew up hearing lies. Her mother, my grandmother, though I barely knew her, was fed the same story my mother later fed me. He's dangerous. He doesn't care. He left you.
Move on.
The bitterness passed down like some cursed family heirloom, generation after generation of women teaching their daughters that men leave, that love is temporary, that abandonment is inevitable, so you might as well abandon first. I sat there on that bench listening to him, and I felt something inside me break open. Not break apart, break open. Like a wound that's been infected for years finally getting lanced, all that poison draining out even though the process hurts like hell. I inherited a wound that never belonged to me. I carried abandonment that wasn't mine to carry. I spent my entire life believing I wasn't worth staying for because my mother needed me to believe that, needed me to share her pain because she couldn't bear to carry it alone. And I was so young, so desperate for whatever scraps of love she'd throw my way, that I believed her. I believed every lie because the alternative, that she'd kept me from someone who loved me, was too devastating to consider. He showed me the letters he'd written.
Dozens of them.
Hundreds maybe. All addressed to me at different ages. Letters for my 10th birthday, my 16th, my graduation, my 21st. Letters he wrote even though he knew I'd never read them, even though he had no address to send them to, even though it must have felt like shouting into a void that never answered back. He kept writing because giving up on me would have meant accepting that he'd lost me forever, and he couldn't do that. He wouldn't. I thought about you every single day, he said, and his voice broke. This grown man, this stranger who was my grandfather, this person who'd been written out of my story before I could even form memories, he cried. For me, for all the years we lost. For the little girl who needed him and never knew he was trying to reach her. And I cried too. Not the quiet tears I'd been hiding when he first sat down. Real crying. The kind that shakes your whole body, that empties you out until there's nothing left but raw truth. I'd spent my entire life feeling abandoned, and the person who abandoned me was the one who convinced me someone else had left first. Weeks passed. Strange, beautiful, painful weeks where I got to know my grandfather, a word that felt foreign on my tongue at first, but became sweeter every time I said it. We met for tea in a small cafe near the river, where he first found me crying. We talked. God, we talked about everything. He told me stories about my mother as a child, before the bitterness hardened her, before she learned to use silence and anger as armor. He told me about my grandmother, about their marriage, about mistakes he made that he couldn't take back, but had spent decades trying to atone for. And I told him about my life, the small apartment I lived in alone, the job that paid my bills but didn't fulfill me, the relationships I'd sabotaged because I didn't believe anyone would stay once they saw who I really was. I told him about the years of therapy, the medications I'd tried, the nights I'd spent wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't just be normal, Why love felt like something that happened to other people, but never to me. "Nothing is wrong with you," he said, his hand covering mine across the cafe table. "You survived something that would have destroyed most people. You're still here. That's not weakness. That's strength." I wanted to believe him. I was starting to. We healed together in places both of us thought were beyond repair. He'd spent years believing he'd failed his daughter, failed his granddaughter, that he was the villain in a story he couldn't rewrite. I'd spent years believing I wasn't worth loving, that my very existence was somehow wrong, that I'd been born broken and would die the same way. We were both wrong. And realizing that together, that was the miracle neither of us expected. Then my mother called. I saw her name on my phone screen, and my first instinct was still to answer immediately, still to make myself available no matter what I was doing, because that's what dutiful daughters do, right? That's what I'd been trained to do. Drop everything, sacrifice everything, because maybe this time she'd finally give me what I'd been starving for my entire life. But I let it ring once more.
Twice.
I looked at my grandfather across the table, and he nodded slightly, like he understood every fear running through my mind without me saying a word. I answered. "I need your help," she said. No hello. No, how are you? Just straight to the demand, because that's all I'd ever been to her, a resource to be extracted when necessary, ignored when not. "What kind of help?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected.
"Money."
"I have a situation and I need money to fix it. Not a lot. Just enough to."
"No."
The word came out before I could second-guess it, before I could fall back into old patterns of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice and swallowing my own needs to make room for hers. Silence. Heavy, shocked silence. "What did you say?" Her voice had that dangerous edge I'd learned to fear as a child, that tone that preceded yelling or cold shoulders or days of being ignored as punishment for daring to have boundaries. I said no. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed firm. "I'm not giving you money. I'm not fixing your problems anymore. I'm choosing myself now. After everything I've done for you?" She wasn't yelling yet, but I could hear it building. "I raised you alone. I sacrificed everything. And this is how you repay me. You didn't raise me alone." The truth felt dangerous on my tongue, but I said it anyway. "You pushed away everyone who tried to help. You kept me from people who loved me because you needed me to be as angry and alone as you were. That wasn't sacrifice. That was control. How dare you?" I met him. I interrupted her. Something I'd never done before, something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I met my grandfather. The one you told me abandoned us. The one who's been trying to reach me for decades while you destroyed his letters and taught me to hate him. Another silence. Longer this time. I could practically hear her recalculating, trying to figure out which manipulation would work, which story would make me fall back in line. "He's lying to you," she finally said, her voice cold. "He's always been a liar. He'll hurt you just like he hurt me." "I don't think so." I was crying again, but these were different tears.
Cleaner somehow.
"I think you're the one who's been lying. To me, to yourself, to everyone. And I can't carry your lies anymore. I can't carry your pain. It's yours, and you'll have to live with it without taking pieces of me to make yourself feel better. You'll regret this," she said, and there it was, the threat, the punishment, the promise that my disobedience would cost me her love. Except her love had always come with conditions, had always been something I had to earn and re-earn, and never quite earned enough. "Maybe," I said. "But I'll regret staying in this cycle even more." I hung up. My grandfather was watching me with tears in his eyes, and I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for the guilt to crash over me, waiting to feel like a terrible daughter, a bad person, someone who just committed an unforgivable sin. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something I'd never felt before. Something light and terrifying and beautiful all at once. Freedom. The silence after that phone call was heavier than any argument we'd ever had.
But it felt like peace.
Like finally putting down a weight I'd been carrying since before I was old enough to know I was carrying anything. My mother called again later that night.
And the next day.
And the day after that. I didn't answer. I wasn't punishing her. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just couldn't be her emotional support animal anymore, couldn't keep sacrificing my own healing to manage her unresolved trauma. She'd have to do that work herself. Or not. That was her choice. And finally, for the first time in my life, I was making mine. Let me take you back one more time to that moment on the park bench. To the lonely girl hiding her tears from strangers, pretending her shoelace needed fixing, drowning in years of accumulated pain that nobody else could see. To the man who sat down beside her with familiar eyes and a question nobody else had bothered to ask. Healing didn't arrive loudly. It didn't announce itself with trumpets and revelations and sudden clarity. It walked in slowly, quietly, dressed as truth, carried by a man who never stopped loving a daughter and granddaughter who never knew he tried. It came in conversations over tea, in letters written to a child who couldn't read them, in the patient unraveling of lies that had been woven so tightly they'd become indistinguishable from truth. I'm not seeking revenge.
I want to be clear about that.
I'm not telling this story to hurt my mother or to paint myself as some perfect victim and her as some irredeemable villain. She's wounded too. She's carrying trauma that probably goes back further than either of us knows, passed down through generations of women who never learned how to heal, only how to hurt and be hurt and hurt again. But her trauma isn't my responsibility to fix. Her healing isn't my burden to carry. And the lies she told to protect herself from her own pain, those lies almost destroyed me before I was old enough to fight back. I found peace beside a river on a wooden bench when a voice I didn't recognize asked a question nobody else had ever cared enough to ask. Why are you crying? That question changed everything. It gave me permission to stop pretending I was fine when I wasn't. It connected me to someone who saw my pain and didn't run from it, didn't try to fix it or minimize it or make it about themselves. It opened a door I didn't know existed, leading to a relationship I'd been told my entire life wasn't possible. My grandfather and I still meet for tea. We talk about books he wants me to read, places he wants to show me, years we can't get back but can at least honor by building something new. He's teaching me that love doesn't always look like what we've been told it should look like, that family isn't always the people who share your blood, and that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from people who need you to stay broken so they don't feel so alone in their own brokenness. I'm learning to choose myself, to believe I'm worth choosing, to understand that the little girl who cried on that park bench wasn't weak or damaged or wrong. She was human. She was hurting. And she deserved someone to notice, to care, to stay. My grandfather stayed. After decades of being pushed away, after years of silence and rejection and doors slammed in his face, he stayed. He saw me crying on a bench, and instead of walking past like everyone else, he sat down. He asked why. He listened. He told me the truth even though it shattered everything I thought I knew. That's love. Not the conditional, transactional, scorekeeping kind I grew up with. Real love. The kind that shows up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The kind that tells the truth even when lies would be easier. The kind that sees someone drowning and refuses to look away. I'm not fixed. I'm not suddenly whole and healed and free of all the damage those years of abandonment caused. I still have days where I struggle to believe anyone would choose to stay. I still catch myself falling into old patterns of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice because those behaviors are carved so deep they feel like part of my personality instead of survival mechanisms I developed to navigate a childhood that taught me love was something you earned by disappearing. But I'm healing.
Slowly.
imperfectly, with setbacks and breakthroughs and everything in between. And I'm not doing it alone anymore. That's the miracle. That's the gift my grandfather gave me when he sat down on that bench and asked a simple question. He gave me permission to stop carrying everything by myself. He gave me proof that I'm worth showing up for, worth fighting for, worth loving not despite my wounds, but as a complete person who includes those wounds as part of her story. So when people ask me how I survived, how I'm still here after everything, how I found the strength to walk away from my mother and choose peace over the familiar pain of that relationship, I tell them about the park bench. I tell them about the stranger with familiar eyes who turned out to be the family I'd been told to hate. I tell them about the letters he wrote that I never received, about the truth my mother buried under decades of anger, about the choice I finally made to believe I deserved better than crumbs of conditional love. And I tell them this: healing is possible. Even when you've been broken for so long you've forgotten what whole feels like. Even when the people who should have protected you were the ones who hurt you most. Even when the truth is so painful you think it might actually kill you to face it. Healing is possible. You just have to be willing to look up when someone asks why you're crying. You just have to be willing to listen when the truth finally finds you. You just have to be willing to choose yourself, even when everything in you has been trained to choose everyone else first. I chose myself. I chose peace. I chose a relationship with a grandfather I'd been told didn't want me, and I let go of a mother who needed me to stay small so she wouldn't feel so large in her own pain. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was also the thing that saved my life. And if you're listening to this, if something in my story resonates with something in yours, if you've ever cried alone because nobody showed up, if you've ever discovered that the truth you were told wasn't the truth at all, if you've ever had to choose between your own healing and someone else's comfort, I want you to know you're not alone. Your pain is real. Your wounds are valid. And you deserve people who show up, who ask why you're crying, who care about the answer. You deserve better than what broke you. And healing, real healing, starts the moment you believe that truth enough to act on it. For me, it started on a park bench beside a river with a stranger who wasn't a stranger at all, whose eyes I'd been searching for in every face I'd ever trusted and never quite found.
Until that day.
Until he sat down beside me and asked the question that changed everything. Why are you crying? And finally, I had an answer worth hearing.